And welcome back, everyone, as this is Strange Planet Podcast. And for this week's topic, we are going to be more or less diving into a controversial topic for this week's episode. And that's going to be whether or not the trans situation in Olympic sports and actually in sports in general, should it be allowed? Should it not be allowed? Before I even give my take, who wants to just take a stab at this first?
I guess I'll talk up first real quick.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think there should be a bar to set. I mean, there's women's sports for a reason, and I think we shouldn't diminish that in any way, shape, or form. But I do not want to rule out those who wish to be women from the sport. There should be if the sport you're trying to get into, you attended or you were part of as a male, I think you shouldn't qualify for the female one because you already have that muscle memory, that muscle build from that. And despite the fact that, most of those transitioning are taking estrogen to lower their testosterone levels, and that lowers their, bulk and size and everything, it's still part of their DNA as a male, and having been in the sport previously, they're already conditioned. So that I feel is a too far big of advantage for them to be dealing with regular women's sports. I mean, you can get some of the best women athletes and get somebody who is 500th in the friggin' country, and they can just decide, well, I'm not making any headway here. Oh, let's go over there. If that is too high a bar to set, I feel that you should have maybe been taking estrogen or whatever for a certain amount of years. It's not like, oh, I just started taking estrogen last week. No. You should already have your body being affected by it for a good chunk of time.
Yeah, and we're talking not just a couple of months there,
because I've seen a lot of men versus women in different types of sports, contact sports, physical sports, athletic sports, and while there are some that come on top in the female world, most of the time it's men, and not even close. I saw a karate match the other day of two people who were fighting, and while the female put up a good fight, the male you could tell he wasn't really going full force. He was reactive more than proactive. So if he let loose like wild beast, like she was probably doing, he would have destroyed her. So it's just there is a reason why we separate the sexes in sports.
Right.
And while this is a very complicated situation that we're dealing with now for those transitioning from one to the other, I just feel that there is still too much of a physical advantage from the male aspect, because we're built to be the hunters, and this is going back hundreds of thousands of years, whatever human history,
and it's genetic.
It's genetic. We're the ones that lift the heavy bricks. We're the ones that transport the heavy goods. We're the ones that go out and hunt the big wild beasts. And again, I'm not saying that there's never been women who've done it, but one out of a million or 100,000, it's just it doesn't equate.
It doesn't equate. Yeah, I can see where you're getting at there. And to tell you the truth, my views are not too different from yours on that, because the way I kind of see it is you're right. There is a division that already stands as it is, and it's there for an obvious purpose and a reason. Now, I have nothing against trans people. I mean, if that's what they want to do, that's their body. They can make the decisions, and I have nothing against them. Nothing like that at all.
I'm not saying that either.
And I'm sure you don't. I know Rook doesn't either. But that being said, I still feel like even when you incorporate all the estrogen and all that involved in it and stuff, I still kind of feel like a male that transitions to a female shouldn't necessarily, I think, be allowed to play in professional sports on the women's team, say, you know what I mean? Because there's still, even if they take that stuff, you know what I mean? I just feel like there's still going to be an advantage. And then after a while, women are going to be like, why would I even play this sport? Because I'm not going to be able to compete against the dude. You know what I mean? In a sense, you know what I mean? Like, no pun intended, of course. But at the same time, it's just, I don't know. I kind of feel like it's a slippery slope. And, you know what I mean? Like, it just, we got to stick to the original roots to a lot of this at the same sense. Now, I'm not saying that they can't play sports in general. There's still, college and everything else. But I just feel like there's going to still be that advantage genetically. You know what I mean? Because like a female that would a female that would transition into a man, that's a different scenario almost altogether compared to what we were just talking about with, say, a man transitioning going into the WNBA. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like, even so, there's still, like, don't get me wrong, like there's still Ronda Rousey's, like there's still some tough ones out there too. You know what I mean? All jokes aside, but like, it's going to be a lot more contact. It's going to be a lot more aggressive. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of different things at stake here. So, I mean, as it stands now, I don't think they really should. But what do you think, Brooke?
Well, um, so I have a little bit of a different take. I'm actually kind of in the middle on whether or not they should, and I think, um, I'd have to learn a lot more about the issue. But
That's
I
true
can
too.
say is that the reason that there are women's sports is not necessarily because they can't compete with men. It's because sports in general, started out as a male activity from which women were excluded.
Okay.
So,
Fair.
women just did not participate in sports. Males, created sports and had, you know, they went to college. Women didn't go to college.
They became actors, and women never became actors.
Well, yeah, I mean, back in the day, you had, in Shakespearean plays, you
Yeah,
had
men playing
men
women.
Yeah,
playing
that's
women roles
true.
or boys playing women roles.
Yeah,
And so I think our gender expectations, not sex, sort of were the origins of why we have two, separate sports. Okay. So fast forward to today, where you have women's sports in college and high school at all levels, professional sports. Um, so there are obviously physical, biological differences between men and women. We're not doctors here, but generally speaking, women have more estrogen, males have more testosterone.
Right.
Testosterone is instrumental in uh, building and maintaining muscle mass, and that just increases your strength. That's not to say that there are sports in which women can do exceedingly well, probably even
Right.
better,
Right.
such as gymnastics,
Right.
where it doesn't require necessarily, it requires a lot of strength, but strength can only get you so far. It has to do with balance and grace and finesse. And that's something that men, kind of kind of lack a lot of times. Um, and so, to say that a male, if a male was to go and compete in uh, a male who transitioned to a female, to compete in women's gymnastics, they might be at a severe disadvantage depending on their body type.
Oh yeah.
You imagine someone like Shaq being like, okay, well, I want to transition to a female and then trying to engage in uh, women's gymnastics. That won't necessarily help them out there.
Yeah, it's not gonna.
But I will say that, to an earlier point that was made, uh, there, like, if Shaq has like an advantage, a biological advantage, as a basketball player over men. He is a men amongst boys in the NBA, or was when he played. that man was like 300 and something pounds of mostly solid muscle. You know,
7'1".
some seasons he didn't take care of his body enough, you know, later in his career. But, you know, there's a reason they called him Shaq Diesel. He could just plow through people and you know, there was no way to, he was unguardable. He was the most dominant force. He was the most dominant force that the NBA had ever seen.
Yep.
And, you know, that is similar, I guess you would say, to, you know, if an NBA player who say was, you know, 6'5", 6'6", went and played in the WNBA, they would, you know, have you know, significant muscle mass advantage. They might be able to, you know, push their way around. That's the same thing that Shaq did to, uh, you know, players in the NBA. But what I think is that we should consider, you know, perhaps measuring testosterone levels. Again, we're not doctors here, so whether, you know, how long it takes for hormone replacement therapy to kick in, I don't know whether to take weeks, months, years, or whatever. But I think what would have to be measured is your hormone levels at the time. Now they drug test players regularly to make sure they're not, you know, taking any steroids and everything like that. And I think maybe we were thinking about sports in the wrong way. Just like how you wouldn't in boxing, you wouldn't necessarily have, you know, a lightweight going up against a heavyweight.
A heavyweight, right?
Uh, that's just not a smart. You know, it's not fair.
At all.
You know, lightweight boxer boxing
Yeah.
against a heavyweight, they may be tremendous, you know, athletes in their own regard, in their own weight class.
You're talking 150, 100
Um,
pounds plus in that case too, you
but
know?
and so maybe we should be thinking about it in terms of not necessarily specifically weight class, but in terms of, you know, hormone levels that are in the respective athletes, and in sports in which physical strength, which is bolstered by testosterone. um, I think that perhaps a way to resolve this is to measure testosterone levels and see, you know, if it's above a certain threshold, or if it's below a certain threshold where, you know, women generally are. See, like someone like, um, well, I don't want to name names because you know, I don't want to speculate anything about their, you know, chemical makeup. But there are,
Right, right.
you know, in the WNBA who might have more testosterone than the average woman, and you know, they were born female and they still are female, and yet they just have more testosterone. Same goes for men. Some men have more testosterone than other men, and perhaps that gives them an advantage in the sport or otherwise. There are certain biological advantages that we all have,
That's
and
true.
we're disadvantages. And so maybe when we're having sports, maybe we should think about it similar to the terms we think of in weight classes, like, you know, certain classes of people, regardless of necessarily, you know, sex or gender, should be able to compete with each other. And at a certain point, it just becomes unfair, and there should be a separate, you know, sort of league for them. Now, if a woman is good enough to compete in a male sport like the NBA or NFL or whatever,
MLB or whatever.
MLB, like if she's good enough, then,
So
you know,
be it.
I don't think we'd have any necessarily problem allowing them to compete in there. And I think if there's a certain class of, you know, even men that, you know, I you know, below a certain threshold of testosterone, once you hit that point, and you know your muscle mass cannot, you know, sort of sustain itself the way that, you know, you can as a male with testosterone, then you lose a lot of the advantages. Now, I know that Mark mentioned, stuff about muscle memory and whatever, but that's stuff that's like trained into you. That's stuff that you acquire. It's not biologically given to you. You
That's
don't come
fair.
out of your mother's womb, knowing how to, throw a baseball or dunk a basketball.
It's
Those are
practice.
things that
Yeah.
you learn, regardless of whether, you're a male or a female. You have to be able to, and so there are certain things like, maybe you grew up, having a basketball playing parent, or there are certain advantages that people have, and maybe they held it like LeBron James's kids. They've probably held the basketball since they were two, uh, and so they have that muscle memory advantage that other people don't have. And so I think, when we're trying to determine whether or not people should play, we should look strictly, I think, at, what are the biological uh, sort of indicators as to whether or not this is fair. And, things that are learned or acquired, muscle memory, I don't think those are as important to making that determination.
All right. Well, that definitely makes sense. And the key word you said during that was fair, because that's the way I see it as it stands now. I mean, yeah, there's two separate leagues, and technically you're right. I mean, technically there could be instances where they could be intermingled, but as it stands now, there's two separate divisions normally for most professional sports. So I feel like, that being said, right now there already is a balance. But if those estrogen things you were pills and stuff and it's procedures you were talking about, if that actually does play a vital role and actually does make a big effect, then maybe you could be more relaxed about it. But at the same time, I kind of feel like if it don't, then it's still gonna leave the balance beam lopsided. You know what I'm saying? So like it's gonna throw a monkey wrench into the system, and it's just not gonna be it's not gonna like make sense in a sense. You know what I mean? Because it's still technically like a born biological male, say, now in the WNBA. So like naturally, even if he's not that great, naturally, like he might have an advantage, you know what I mean, over his competitors. Whereas it stands now, it's not
Is
quite
the
the case.
advantage biological? I think that's the question you need to ask. Because if the advantage is not biological, if it's something learned or acquired, you know,
Yeah,
females
that's
have,
skill. It's different.
females have, as much opportunity in theory to acquire the skills of a male.
I mean,
Uh,
that's fair, but to
they
throw
can they can now males might no, this is generally speaking, you know, have larger hands than females, which may help them grip a basketball. Now, if you're Trump, that might not, necessarily work out for you. But yeah, most males generally have large,
right?
and so gripping a basketball or football, you know, that's just a biological advantage. But some like Michael Jordan, for instance, the difference between Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant was that Michael Jordan had naturally huge hands, whereas Kobe Bryant, his hands were a little smaller. And so he had to like find ways to compensate for the fact that he couldn't grip a basketball the way
Like
Michael
Jordan could.
could. Now he
Yeah.
emulated Jordan very, very well. He was as close to Jordan as I think anyone.
Anyone's ever gonna get.
Well,
Yep.
well, I don't know about ever, but so far, like he's the
Right.
closest I've seen to Jordan. Uh, you know, his hands weren't as good, but he made up for it in other ways, and he was able to achieve, a lot of the similar stats that Jordan was able to, and do a lot of those moves and dunks that Jordan was able. And
Right.
so I think with skill, and training, and effort, you can overcome a lot of the things that you're not necessarily born with logic.
That's fair too. Mark, I believe you had something you wanted to add.
So before I make my point, you will agree that, male, female, definitely physical difference. I'm not talking like, trans
Oh
from
yeah.
one to the other. I'm just saying like pure
In
cold
general,
male,
yeah.
female.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So my thing is
In general,
development.
in general, I will
Yeah,
say.
in general, absolutely. But like my thing is development. Like you say, you get a 10-year-old boy who wants to become a female. They start hormone treatments. Then they start to grow up. More female hormones are coming in. At that point, I don't think you have an advantage anymore because by the time you're 20, 25, you've been a female for X amount of years,
Okay.
and you've already gone
Okay.
through your prime as a female rather than growing up as a male in your prime, then transitioning over. See, when I look at that kind of biological change, that's a permanent change. You know, when you get into your 18s and your 20s as a male, you're reaching your physical peak. So
Basically, you're not going to be growing much more. Yeah.
You know, short from lifting weights or calisthenics or anything, you're at your peak physical condition for who you are as a male. Now, to transition from that a few years later and then try to get into sports, I feel you're still holding that male strength in your body. And while, you know, estrogen and testosterone levels reduced can, you know, weaken that skill, that strength, it still has a framework, I believe, that's just stronger in general. But like I said, it's development. If you start early enough,
Are you
that
basing that on
becomes
science or is that just a feeling?
I'm basing on what I know of science, what I, you know, from high school, college, everything, from what I remember all the science is saying.
I don't think they taught that in high school or college. This is
No,
a
but like
different
weight
time.
training and stuff, you know, it's just men have a bigger build out from birth. So it's that's just
Generally
that end.
speaking,
But I'm
but yeah,
saying
that is true.
I'm saying that it is possible for a trans woman to be in women's sports. But it's like there are certain things that can give them an advantage based on their biology. Now,
Sure, and there's certain things that give Shaq an advantage over men.
yeah,
based
but
on
Shaq's a
biology.
phenom. You know what I'm saying? Shaq's like a once in a lifetime kind of
Yeah, that's
an
not a common
athlete.
occurrence. That's a good
Yeah,
point too.
but
Yeah.
like if you get like, who's the worst team in the NBA?
Well, it's not the Knicks
You already know
anymore.
where I'm going with this.
Yeah, right.
If you take the
I
entire
was going to
team,
say that too.
if you take the entire team and then transition them for a year and then send them into the WNBA, they will be the most dominant team in the WNBA.
Yeah, that's what I was
Because
getting at.
they're
That's
bigger,
what I was
physical,
getting
more.
at.
Like I said before, like if you take, you know, a heavyweight fighter and put him up against a
But like
lightweight,
you're
they're
losing the
win.
phenom. You know what I'm saying? It's like Shaq's a phenom. Shaq's a once in a lifetime athlete coming. It's not it's a rare occasion.
Yeah, you
But
don't
when you
see
do
people
things
that
like this,
size every
you're going to
day.
get dozens upon dozens of athletes that are switching from male to female to get into better positions in sports.
Now,
I mean,
hold on. Do you really? So I think this is. Do you really think that there's going to be a bunch of people that are going to like, you know?
no, I don't think it's going to be like a flood of like, you know, all
like,
these people. But it's just
like
yeah, right. That's
a serious fucking like decision to make. You know, like that's a serious decision when you're going to be like, you know what, I'm gonna like, you know, cut it off and
but you don't even have to cut it off.
right.
That's
But
the thing.
I'm just saying, like, it's not something that anyone would do. Like, it's not common.
Yeah, but it's more common than like a once in a lifetime athlete.
Like, yeah, like someone Shaq size, say.
Sure, but how much more common?
Probably not by much. That's true.
Yeah,
I
think it's overhyped by a lot of people, especially those that want to wage culture wars. Now there is you know a situation that Mark raised, and that is, you know, an Olympic swimmer. Would you like to, you know, tell us about that a little bit?
All right, so I don't know the name offhand, but Olympic swimmer, you know, most of her later years, she's training, she's doing everything. She's working hard to get where she is. So the day comes of the tournament. Now she has a trans woman athlete. I think it was on the same team, but you know they do individual scores anyway. They tied.
Right.
Now this person was not on the team. I don't know what their work ethic was. They were formerly a male swimmer that really didn't place in the Olympics, so they switched to female.
Okay.
Now,
hold on. Before you go on, why did they switch to female? Was it to say
I don't know whether they wanted to do it or whether they wanted to gain an advantage. That's for them and God. You know what I'm saying? It's just like we're never going to know that. I mean, we can speculate all we want. You can give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
But the thing was, they tied, and it was the committee's decision to give it to the trans woman rather than the actual athlete, the female athlete.
Both athletes.
So, I mean, at that point, you're playing politics. You're not playing, who won. Maybe they should have both won. It's just.
I mean, if it was a tie, I mean, you're right.
Maybe they had some way of doing a tiebreaker. I mean,
for me, it was just it felt to me that the trans athlete had a way bigger advantage than the female athlete who worked her tail off.
Not really. If they tied,
well, that's how good she was versus how good they were.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, they both were equally as good.
I mean, if they didn't place in male, but then they placed in female.
But they're both equally as good. They tied. You're looking at it from the standpoint of, oh, well.
I'm looking at the standpoint of this was like a top level athlete in her field versus a not top level athlete in his field. And when he became they is in a different field. They went presumably through hormone replacement therapy. And
do we know that though?
Eating. I mean, I'm sure in order to compete in the Olympics, yes.
You would hope so, right? Yeah, but
I mean, another thing besides the whole physicality of it all is just that this person is what is known as pre-op, which is they still have their sausage and berries.
Right.
And they just changed in the girls' bathroom like it was good. And the other athletes had no idea. And to be quite honest, that's a little like, hey, warning, heads up, something, give me, hello.
Okay, but that's an issue of sexuality.
Yeah, it's a completely different issue. But
no, I mean, there are obviously female athletes that are homosexual, and there are, would that make them uncomfortable? Like, I mean, when you're a professional athlete, you're not really concerned. If you act professionally, I don't think there's any problem.
I believe they acted professionally, but they're still in the back of their minds were like, what is going on?
Yeah, I can see why that would be a little, out of the ordinary, I guess.
I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I'd rather undress in front of a woman than a man.
Yeah, but that's the difference between men and women.
Yeah.
Women see enough dick pics in their day where they don't need to see another one and just turn around, oh, great. It's like guys can't get enough. Send me bush.
Look, if you're a professional athlete, you're there to do business. Like if you're like an NBA player.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he was like waving it around or whatever the situation was.
Woman comes into the locker room to interview you, and that's just what happens. Like you're a professional athlete, do your fucking job,
and leave it at that. Yeah.
Right, and don't engage in any inappropriate activity
while
you're at.
That makes sense.
That's more like if you're there are probably gay men in the NBA, Are they in locker rooms and undressing and watching men undress? Sure.
Sexual appetite versus physical.
They're professional athletes. Maybe it would make some NBA players uncomfortable if they knew that their teammate was gay. But you know what? For the most part, they don't care. They just go to work. They're professional athletes.
And they play the damn game.
They don't care.
So you're saying there's no advantage.
Dwight Howard. Like that, he allegedly, or he might have admitted that he was gay or bisexual or whatever. Like
I don't care about that.
some players might have been uncomfortable by it, but I mean, if he's a player, they go into the same locker room, they undress, they fucking
Yeah,
shower.
but that's different from the
Like,
whole, topic of what we were talking about today in the same sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not quite the same thing because there's no like
right,
change
but
there. You know what I mean?
right, but we're talking about like why does it make them uncomfortable? It's because there's a potential for sexual attraction. That's what it boils down to.
I mean, that's yeah.
Someone is enjoying your state of undress in a way that would make you uncomfortable. When you're around, other men, presumably other straight men, they're not going to be like checking you out, like you. So you're not really worried about, someone enjoying your state of undress. But obviously there are gay men in sports.
Right,
Obviously
right.
there are gay women in sports. And so there's really no way to avoid that. And so that, I think that's an issue of not necessarily transgender
That's a
or for
separate
trans.
issue.
That's a separate issue of whether someone is comfortable or not undressing in front of other people in a professional setting, and whether those people, respect the fact that they're in a professional setting or not. If you're a professional athlete and you act professionally, I don't think there's any problem undressing in front of anyone.
Well, I mean, yeah, because that's a different topic compared to what we were talking about prior. So I mean that kind of comes
Oh,
with
I mean,
the package.
we got on the topic. So I just thought,
Yeah. But like that, yeah, I mean, you could even say that as far as going way outside the box and even saying like firemen and shit. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Because sometimes that's the same kind of case too, where there could be, some mixed in and they all change sometimes
It's
together and, in
it's
the
a
locker
different
rooms and in the
story.
showers.
It's a different story when the precedent is established, spoken about before, introduced. When you're blindsided with something like that, it's uncomfortable. Even
It
in a
could be for
professional
some though.
situation.
It could be for
When
some.
when you're thrown for the loop without giving a heads up, it's just like, what the hell? You don't even care about us? You care about the one person instead of everyone else in this locker room? Suddenly
right.
their
But
beliefs and their
hold
feelings
on,
take precedent over what we're doing
hold
here.
on, but why would it make them uncomfortable?
Well, cut
Like,
right
Because
there.
they're females. They don't need to have that stuff around them. And that's the way it's been. I mean, granted,
I mean, that's
yeah, they don't have to look at it. They don't have to be like, oh my God, but like the fact that it's there. So I mean, when it comes down to it, it's sure there's a certain bit of professionalism that needs to be acquired there, but at the same point, we've been separating males and females in bathrooms for forever. So this new element that's recently been coming around the last 5 years or so, it's just I feel like they're getting more credit, not more credit. They're getting more doors open for them than should be open for right now. And let me explain that. It's I'm not ready to write the trans community a blank check to do whatever they want. I mean, explore your sexuality, make the transition if you want. That's great. That's on you. That's your deal. But like at the same time, I feel like they're forcing everyone else to live by their standards. And that's not the way reality is. It's like we all as a whole kind of set the standards for everything. And it's more of a push back and forth of what's acceptable, what's not. And we know for a fact that women do not allow men or people with phallic symbols or whatever twigs and berries like within the same changing room. It's just you don't do that. But at the same time, I do
okay,
agree with Rook on aspect that there should be a bit of professionalism, but I feel like there's too much happening too fast. And because there's too much happening too fast, you're seeing these outlier elements of people who haven't transitioned enough or have physical advantages over other female athletes. Um, the bathroom situation is just like it's coming on too fast for everybody, and it's just like we need to slow it down a little bit to the point that we can start making sense of it all because it's still confusing. I mean, what do you do with when kids? Do you let them transition? Do you have them grow up in their regular physical bodies so it could be normal at first and then you can alter it? It's there's a lot of things happening.
Up in the air there. I see where you're
Yeah,
getting.
it's
Yeah, that,
it's right now it's
That's
up
a
in the air and there's no rules, and
that's a
we need to come to a common ground.
I was going to say the kids and transitioning issue is a bit separate. That's a more complicated topic that
yeah.
involves
Yeah, but
safety.
it's ingrained in the entire topic because it's just with
Well, no,
everything.
there's an element of whether or not children are permitted to do anything, because children are not
Fully
adults
developed.
that have the same rights as an adult necessarily. We govern children a lot differently than we do adults, and also there's a safety aspect of it, and whether or not such transitions are both safe health wise, in terms of physical health and mental health. Those things are very complicated topics. But just going back to people not being ready for change, I think the operative question should not be whether people are ready, but what is the right thing to do. um, Change shouldn't have to wait until people are comfortable with it. It should be, are we treating people equally? Are we treating people fairly? And if we're not, then we need to do so
You got to do something. Yeah.
immediately, not wait until people are comfortable with it.
In that situation, the girls' locker room was not treated fairly. They were blindsided with a penis. It's just like, oh,
You know what? When I when I go to a gym, I don't want to see someone's wrinkly fucking penis. I'm not ready for that. But you know what?
but it's
It happens, unfortunately.
it's there
Right.
in the text. It's it's a possibility.
I didn't fucking know I was gonna see a penis today. Like, sorry, I didn't. Like, but you know what?
So, all right,
It
where did you
happened,
see the
right?
penis in the gym?
It's
Did you see it
it's
in the bathroom, or did
hold
you
on,
see
hold
it
on,
out on the floor?
hold on. In other cultures around the world, men and women go to the same bathroom, and it's no fucking issue.
There's no division technically. Yeah, there's like the same sex bathrooms.
It's a cultural thing, and it's a culturally created problem that can easily be solved by, either having
Just letting it be.
neutral bathrooms, or just
Or just suck it up and deal.
That's what I meant before. Gender
no,
neutral bathrooms.
and in a professional sports environment in which you are going to a locker room and showering after a game, man, like, that is part and parcel. It goes with the territory. You're going to undress in front of some people probably who are, at some point in your career, you're probably going to undress in front of a homosexual person. Like,
yeah, but that's see, you're looking at it from a sexual standpoint.
right.
Not all women look at it at a sexual standpoint. They're just uncomfortable with that kind of situation being around them. It's
okay.
I mean, why does it all have to come back to, oh, they're going to rape me? It's not about that. It's just that they shouldn't have to be subjected to that.
Right,
if
but
you do not want to have to see a penis in a locker room that's specifically designed
for women,
for your gender. I mean, granted, this was a special case scenario where they were put on the team, but like the team was blindsided by it. It was approached wrong, is what I'm saying. And because of that, they overlooked the wrongness just because they were like, oh, but this is their moment. But like, it shouldn't have to be their moment. What about the rest of the team? All the girls that worked hard, the ones that got second place, fourth place, ninth place. You're not going to cheer them on. I'm like, no, you have to stare at that penis. Sorry.
Yeah, but if someone came in first place, they're usually celebrated.
Yeah, that's usually.
Yeah, but she wasn't celebrated. They were celebrated. Instead of splitting the trophy between the two winners, they chose the transgender athlete because that was what
were the
popular.
criteria? What were the criteria for the tiebreaker?
There was no tiebreaker.
Yeah, they said there was two that made it in the end, and they were tied. He said.
Yep. And when the female
first,
athlete asked about what's going on with that, they're like, "Oh, we're just going to give it to them."
That
was their answer.
That doesn't sound like it was. I don't know. There's probably a procedure in some rule book that says how that's supposed to go down. Because I'm sure this wasn't the first tie
Yeah, they didn't
in
just pick a name out
the
of a
history of
hat,
the
you know?
sport. Like, did they flip a coin? Like how did they choose this? I don't think we have enough information to
Because
make.
That's what we're
it
lacking
was
some
the
information here, I think.
popular choice. That's why they chose it.
I
They
mean,
could
that's
have
the
given
way
it
it
to both
seems right
athletes, had
now,
both
but we don't
athletes be
necessarily know
separated,
it.
but instead of having both athletes be separated, they gave it to them and basically put her out in the cold. Like, yeah, no, sorry, we're gonna give it to her, them, whatever. It's I'm not trying to come down on the community.
Yeah, no,
I'm
none of
saying
us
that,
are.
like,
We're just bringing a point up
there's a
here.
certain sense of entitlement in the community that should not be there.
Entitlement to being treated equally and fairly.
Are
Because I
they
think
though?
everyone should be
Are they
entitled to.
though? Are they though? That's the problem. They're not being treated equally or fairly. They're being treated with kid gloves, like the mayors in town. No, they should be treated like everybody else. Well, I mean, to make my point across the whole thing, I feel like we need to take a second and think before we react to the whole trans community situation. I'm not saying to like shelve it and like not do anything about it, but I'm not saying to do reactive stuff right away. I'm saying like, okay, that's a good point. Let's talk about it. Where can we meet in the middle? Where can we make it so like everyone has a little bit of comfort, or you know, there has to be a give and take, and it feels like there's a lot of take from their side, and like,
Well,
oh,
that's because
how
they
dare you
haven't
say
been
otherwise
given,
to me because I'm
they haven't been afforded, the opportunities that they probably should have. They've been forced to hide and to, not participate, or if they do participate, to hide their participation. Um, and so, there are probably, more trans athletes that maybe we don't even know about. Just like, there were gay athletes in the NBA and the NFL that we didn't know about because they weren't, welcome.
Yeah, and that's not right. But there is a difference between just a gay or a lesbian athlete and then the trans situation. You know what I mean? Because they
Of course,
didn't go
there are
through.
two different things, but
Yeah,
obviously, if someone's not welcome in a league and there's no policy in place that makes it abundantly clear that they are welcome, then I mean that places that certain group at a disadvantage. Now, again, like I said, I'm kind of in the middle. Like I can understand there are legitimate concerns about like the competitiveness of sports, whether when you have women's sports, allowing uh, athletes who used to be men to compete in those sports, that might create some unfairness depending on the sport and the standards that the league has for allowing certain players to compete in the league and certain players not to compete. I think we need to sort of go back to the drawing board and sort of rethink our standards in terms of what kind of strength is involved in the sport, and um, whether we should think about it in sort of like a heavyweight lightweight situation, or then they have things in between. But it's harder to do when you have an NBA and a WNBA. How do you get, is there like a middle, like middleweight, that just sounds silly to us right now. But if it's about creating fairness in terms of competition, maybe that's just what's required in order to have fairness. And just because it makes us like oh, that's kind of weird or uncomfortable, that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do.
I
If we
see what
do
you're saying there.
the fairness and competitiveness of sports.
maybe make a mixed league.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring that up. I don't know if that's ever going to really happen, but that could be a possible solution.
Maybe
But
have
in the
maybe have a mixed league that has to have a certain amount of women, a certain amount of men.
but in the end,
Where
it's
like
all about like fairness and equality, and also for like just the
Well,
love of the game in a sense too. So you can't. So it's not like
well,
obviously biased or unbalanced. You know what I
no,
mean?
I
at
mean
that
like
point, it's not about whether you have men or women. It's about the level of strength and fitness or testosterone. Like it would be more about that in terms of whether a sport is competitive or not. That is one measure of whether unfairness can be found in that league. So like again, like if you
But
have
like if you're looking for equality and fairness, like a mixed league entirely would be the best way to go. And I
not
say like you
necessarily
should have
a mixed football league, just because you have men and women, it doesn't mean anything. Like if you have Shaq as a lineman tackling like you know Michelle Kwan as a quarterback, that's not really fair. Like
okay, then you get China to be your center.
no, but what I'm saying is that like if you have a mixed league, it's not just for having male and female or whatever gender. It's about what the sport requires in terms of competitiveness, in terms of biology,
Physicality and stuff. Okay.
and so like, is there a room in that sport for say sort of middle ground in terms of that level of physicality? There may be, maybe there isn't. Maybe physicality in that sport doesn't, factor in as much. Um, like I mentioned before, gymnastics, strength only helps you so much. There's finesse takes you, the rest of the way, and balance and everything. So, we need to rethink the way we think about sports and gender in sports.
You're
And
saying like most sports should have like a combine where the athletes perform certain runs and jumps and certain other things. Like, all
we
right,
do have,
you did a 2.5 in speed and you
we
lifted,
do, right. We do have that.
but that's for football. We don't have that for every sport.
Right,
You know,
right.
I see what you're saying. Like, if we had like every year before
We do
you
have that for
started.
basketball as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think
All
it's
right, so
just
you're saying
football.
like, say if Ronda Rousey decided to start playing sports and she lifted X amount of weight, and like, okay, she looks like based on her physicality, she could play in the NFL because she's got the strength to be able to deal with lifting heavy men
And getting
and
freaking knocked too,
getting
though.
knocked around. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, I could see how that kind of a metric would work, where you could like say, okay, you need to have a certain amount of physicality strength in order to proceed in this type of a sport. Like running would be more
Well,
of
hold
endurance
on,
than
hold on,
Four
hold on.
minutes.
So like all right, so when you have, if you
so
want to
much for
go
5 minutes.
and if you want to go up and like compete with people who maybe have more physicality than you, that's fine. You're only being unfair to yourself possibly. But if you have more physicality than someone in a league that has less physicality, then you trying to play in that league is unfair. So like you should be able to compete upward. You shouldn't be able to
Yeah,
compete downward.
you should compete upward because, like Goku says, that's how you become stronger. You face someone stronger than you, and that makes you raise your limit higher and pushes you to go further.
So what we're saying now, though, is we actually think that we should have like a universal sports league or something.
There
No,
should be
I was
there
gonna
should be
say because
certain
I'm not. I
metrics
don't
to.
think that's
I
gonna
think I think
make any
it's
sense.
for it should be on a sport by sport basis. We should rethink the way we think about sports and physicality in sports, because it was created at a time when frankly there were no women,
Yeah, it
that
was
they didn't consider women.
all the Olympics were men, so
So they were just like, it wasn't considered at all.
That's
And so
yeah. That's a good
that
point.
women want to play sports, are involved in sports, are tremendously talented at sports, we need to take another look at it and say, you know, this is, we need to approach it from a way that takes women into account, not, in terms of their gender necessarily or their sex, but in terms of, we need to think about it in terms of physicality and whether or not any gender advantages or disadvantages create a fair arena for competition. because that's what people want to see. They want to see competitive sport or league or whatever. They want to see fair and competition that is they want to see
It's
competitive.
balanced. Yeah. All right. And that is all we got for this week, folks. So our question to you is, what do you think? Should trans women and men be allowed to play in sports of their their opposing counterpart? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you next week. Thanks for watching.
Take care.